Hello everyone and welcome to the very first episode of Short Film Reviews, where I basically take a handful of short films that are available on the internet, mostly YouTube, and review them in a quick-fire style. Now, before I get into today's short films that I'll be talking about, I just want to make a few things very clear. First of all, when I review these short films, I will try not to be as harsh as I can be with my normal movie reviews, because I realise that some of the people making these short films are in a similar position to I am. Maybe they don't have the same experience as a professional filmmaker, or maybe they don't have the budget of a Hollywood movie. So I understand that they're only trying, and it's kind of a case with a lot of people's short films that it's just like, you keep trying until something works. Most of the time, a lot of the stuff you make will be misses, so I will completely understand where they're coming from, so I will take every short film I review with a grain of salt and try and give more of a constructive criticism rather than just straight up slating it if I don't like it. Secondly, like I said, all of the short films I talk about will be available to watch online, mostly on YouTube, so every short film I review in an episode will have a link for it in the description below, so you can check them out for yourselves and make your own mind up on them. And the third and final thing is that the way I rate these short films is completely different to how I do my normal movie reviews. Because as you know, with my movie reviews, I give a movie a grade out of 10, 8, 5, 4, 6. But here, I'm doing it slightly differently to kind of grasp a bit better how much I enjoyed or didn't enjoy a certain short film. And the way I'll be doing it is via the scale you are seeing on your screen right now, which I've divided into 5 different rating categories, if you will. You have very good, which is the highest a short film can get. You have alright, which goes for a short film that I thought was overall pretty good, but had some things drawing it back that weren't that good. The middle one is for any short films that I think are fine, but they're not great, but they're not bad either. Then the next one down is room for improvement, which has a few good ideas in it, but overall isn't that well executed. And the final one is back to the drawing board, which is where I will probably go more in depth about how they could improve the short film, maybe what I would change to make it better if I was rewriting the short film from scrap, and maybe a few pointers to said filmmaker to kind of improve with future short films. Like I said, I'm not trying to be harsh with these reviews, I'm just trying to kind of help the filmmakers that have made the short films, which is why if I give a short film one of the lowest grades, I won't just slate the short film to hell. I will just try my best to kind of explain ways how they could improve next time, or how they could have improved the short film if they were to make it again. So, with all that being said, let's get on to the first short film, and the first one is Rocks That Bleed, directed by Bertie Gilbert. I'm not gonna lie, this is one of my personal favourite short films that I've ever seen, because it pretty much nails every aspect. Bertie Gilbert's direction of this short film is both realistic and quite stylish at the same time. The stylish cinematography, who I think was done by Kieran O'Brien, I'm not 100% sure, but the way he composes certain shots, and especially towards the end, it just makes everything a little bit more professional looking and a little bit more, gives it a little bit more oomph in terms of visual storytelling. But that being said, the direction and the settings that they use makes everything a bit more grounded in reality, which is nice. I really like the chemistry between the two main characters, who are supposed to be brothers in this short film, played by Jack Howard and Bertie Gilbert. I thought their relationship really worked and blossomed over the progression of the short film, and I thought that was really nice to see. The only thing I will say though, and is probably my only nitpick with the short film, is that the dialogue and delivery of said dialogue at the very start of the short film is a little bit off. But that being said, it does smoothen out as the short film progresses and just becomes a lot more well-rounded, to an ending that almost had me in tears. That's how good the ending was. I could honestly talk about Rocks That Bleed for days. I think it's one of Bertie Gilbert's best short films, up there with the likes of Let It Bleed. I definitely think it's the best looking short film he's done recently, and I really, really like it. I'm obviously going to give Rocks That Bleed a very good. The next short film is called 2 AM The Smiling Man and is based off of a creepypasta Reddit post that was published several years ago, and this is one of the more popular short films based off of that post. Now, I'm going to start off by saying that the one thing this short film gets 100% right is the atmosphere and tone. It is very creepy, but also feels like this could happen to anyone, especially the fact that they set it at nighttime on a random street. It feels like this could happen to anybody, and the protagonist and the way that the smiling man himself are portrayed really does add a sense of realism to it, despite the fact that it's made up. The guy who plays the smiling man is incredibly creepy and is very effective, not to the point where he's overdoing it, because at first, when I first saw him, I was like, not sure about him. But as the short film progresses, it works for the sake of the short film. The main protagonist I thought was pretty good in places, but there are a few times where he gives very obvious facial expressions, which is just like not needed in a short film like this, especially with the fact that the tone and creepiness is very subtle throughout most of the short film. So to have him pulling these very, obvious facial expressions kind of pulls you out of the moment. Another thing that pulls you out of the moment, besides his facial expressions, are some of the sound effects, which I think could have been done a little bit better. Because the way they happen in this movie, especially the footsteps of the characters, both the smiling man and the protagonist, sound incredibly fake and added on afterwards, which I feel they could have found a way around that by recording the actual footsteps on the day of filming. Like I said, this whole thing just kind of pulls you out of the moment, especially when you have shots of, say, the smiling man himself quite far away from the camera, but yet again his footsteps sound extremely loud and incredibly close. Apart from that, I do think this is a very effective short film that tries to creep you out rather than straight up scare you, and I think it works in that area. I'm going to give 2 AM The Smiling Man an alright grade. I think it's pretty good for what it is, but I think they could have adjusted those things, then it would have been great. The next short film is called On My Way, and is one that I really like just for its ambitious nature of it. It's a very simple premise, but pulled off in a very sophisticated way. The premise is that you have this guy presumably going to a fancy dress party, and he drives through the streets to said party, but on the way he encounters these almost psycho zombie-like weirdos that try and attack him on the way there. Now, like I said, that is a very simple concept, but the thing that makes this short film stand out from any other that I've seen is that the entire thing is given an illusion to make it look as if it was done in one take. I don't think it was. I have watched the behind-the-scenes video, and I think they did a few camera and editing techniques to work around it, but overall, the illusion is really well realised, because if I hadn't have known how they pulled it off, then I would have believed they did it in one shot. There is very little dialogue in the short film, and the same goes for 2 AM The Smiling Man as well. There's very little dialogue in both, and I think that works. It adds to the tension and the realism at the moment, whilst also putting you in that position as well. The cinematography, lighting and look to this short film is really nice. Again, like 2 AM The Smiling Man, it is filmed at night time, and it just looks very slick and stylish, but also believable at the same time. Almost kind of like the movie Drive in a way. I also really like the use of visual effects text on the screen for whenever the driver protagonist is texting his friend, it's shown up on the screen in front of him as if it was floating in midair. And I really like that because it kind of gives you a way of, connecting with him in some sort of way, but it also, distracts you from something that could happen in a minute. For example, there's a very good use of it towards the beginning where he's texting, you see the text message up on the screen, but this is supposed to distract from the weirdo that is running at the car in the background, which later leads to a jump scare that I thought was very well done. There are a few moments where I felt the weirdos outside of the car could have been used to a bit more of a scare advantage, because like The Smiling Man, this short film is played more for creep factor than actual scare factor, and I feel they could have done a lot more with that. The other nitpick I do have, and it's a very subtle one at that, is that there are a few times where the camera turns round, still giving the one-take look, but you can ever so slightly tell that it is out of focus. For example, there is one point where the camera turns round and you see two weirdos on the street. Then it turns back round to the protagonist in the car and it's ever so slightly out of focus. It's just little things like that that do bug me a little, because it, again, takes you out the moment. Nowhere near as much as the footsteps in The Smiling Man. But when you notice it, it's just something you can't unnotice on a rewatch. But one thing I will say is that it does add to the authenticity that it was done in one take, so I will give them that. Despite that though, I'm going to give On My Way a very good, because I really like this short film. It has a very simple premise, but is pulled off in a very, very effective way. The next short film is one that I really like, but I honestly don't have much to say about it, and it is called Guacamole, and it is made by Pez. No, not that one. Fresh Guacamole doesn't have a plot at all, it's just very nice visuals that are very well executed. It's a stop-motion animated short film blended in with a few live action shots of a hand, but it is really effective in a way that I didn't think would be. Basically, if you haven't seen this short film, it's basically just someone making guacamole, but all of the fruits and vegetables are replaced with inanimate objects you wouldn't usually put in a guacamole. But the thing is, those inanimate objects are still representing the fruit or vegetable they've replaced. For example, when someone goes to pick up a tomato and dice it, instead it's replaced with a cricket ball, and when it's diced up, it turns into little red dice. And it's just small little details like that, in terms of the things they replace the fruit and vegetables with, that I think are really interesting and unique to this short film. For example, the avocado is replaced with a grenade. And it's just small things like that that I really find interesting. Like I said, there isn't really much to say about this short film because it's not that long and it's incredibly simplistic, but it is extremely effective. The animation is really well executed. It also makes me kind of hungry. I don't know why, but I just want to eat a bowl of what they have made, despite the fact that it's got shit like poker chips and fucking dice in there. I still want to eat it. So I'm going to give Fresh Guacamole a very good, because, like I said, very simple but extremely effective short film that has some of the best animation I've seen in a short film. Now, the final short film I'll be talking about is Deep Promises, directed by Ben Ramsey, who some of you may know is a good friend of mine. And this short film was released earlier in July this year. Now, for those of you that don't know what this short film is, there is a bit of an interesting back history to it. In 2015, after the release of The Source and The Great Illusion, Ben Ramsey's first two short films, his next short film, which was set for a December 2015 release date, was Deep Promises. But unfortunately things got in the way and it had to be moved back to, I think, June or July 2016. And that never happened either. Instead, The Source 2 Code Red was made. And Deep Promises was pushed back to, I believe, December of 2016. And again, it didn't get made. Luckily, it finally got its release date in early July 2017, 2 years after its initial release date. And I've got to say, it's actually Ben's best short film to date. I will admit it's not the best thing I've ever seen. I mean, hell, Rocks That Bleed is miles better than this. But that being said, it's still very good, especially for Ben Ramsey's standard of short films. And the main reason that is because despite the basic and cliched plot, it plays out like an actual movie, compared to his other short films which do feel like they wander a little bit and have that one scene that drags on for longer than any other scene in the rest of the short film. With Deep Promises, everything is evenly paced and feels like you're watching a proper movie with a believable and well-rounded plot. The acting is pretty good in the short film, but there are a few people, mostly Ben at certain times, that do overact. And what I mean by that is, like, there is this one scene where Ben is riding his bike and he ends up crashing. And as much as he's trying, it does feel like he's, you know, oh, I'm so acting right now. But yet again, he filmed that bit on his own, so what can you do about it? However, like I said, it's not perfect, and there are a couple of nitpicks that I do have with it. The first one being the editing. Now, I will admit there is nothing, like, horrendous with the editing. It's absolutely fine. But it just doesn't feel, you know, great. The editing just feels like it was just cut together, very simplistically cut together. And I feel like the fact that, like, people like myself and friends of Ben have been waiting 2 years for this short film just kind of feels a little bit rushed somehow. Like I said, the overall feel of the short film is really well handled, but the editing makes it look as if he just edited it a week before shoving it on YouTube. Which, if he did, I've got nothing against. It just feels like the fact that we've waited 2 years for this short film, you could have at least edited it fully, then gone over it to double check it and make sure it's up to the right standards. Because especially seeing that a lot of people within our friend group were really hyping it up to something that we thought was going to be really good, and the fact that it looks as rushed as it is just kind of, you know, kind of feels a little bit underwhelming. Another thing I will say is the cinematography / camera placement. Again, it's kind of like the editing. There are a lot of shots that work, but they're nothing special or spectacular. Because in a short film, I know the main thing you have to do is tell a story. But whenever I make a short film, I try and make it look as visually appealing as I possibly can. I think about the camera shots before I place them. And then I set up the shot and then try it a few times and see which one is better, then stick with that. And because I've worked with Ben in the past on such short films as The Source and The Source Code Red, I know that his way of filming is, I don't want to say lazy, because I feel like that's a bit too harsh, but it just feels very rushed. Because the way he goes about filming most of his short films is that people will say their lines and act out a scene, and he'll just point the camera at it, not setting up the shot or anything. He'll just film what is happening and then move on to the next shot without really thinking about it. And a couple of times in his other short films, this does lead to several continuity errors and things kind of not making sense. Here, it's not that bad, but you can tell a lot of the shots were just, you know, filmed. They weren't set up and properly, you know, calibrated or sorted out. They were just filmed. In the end, though, I'm going to give Deep Promises an alright grade, but not like a strong alright. It's probably the low end, kind of on the borders between and alright. It's definitely Ben Ramsey's most consistent and best short film to date. But yeah, again, it's not really saying much. So guys, that was my very first episode of short film reviews. Like I said, all of the short films I talked about today are in the description below if you want to check them out. If you like the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Bye.